Yeah, Tom's not here. People always realise this when I'm the first voice on the podcast that people hear. It's like, oh no, Tom's not here. Matt's on his own. However, I'm not on my own today. You are listening to Beneath the Skin, the show about everything, told through the history of tattooing. I am Dr. Matt Lodder, but instead of Thomas, I am here with a friend of the show, legend in his own lunchtime, MJ Forrest. Well, welcome to the show. Happy Valentine's Day, MJ.
Happy Valentine's Day, Matt. I wouldn't want to spend it with anyone else.
Oh, bless you. How was your day? Has it been full of love?
No, I didn't tattoo today. I painted a bit. And
full of hate.
Look, Spite. I hate the painting that I did. It's not going to see the light of day. So yeah, it was like, I realized it's like when you're doing a painting and it's just looking like shit, and you're convincing yourself, trust the process, trust the process, trust the process, and then you get to the end of it, and you're like, this is garbage, and then I'm like, I was wrong to trust the process, and then about an hour later, you're like, maybe that's part of the process.
Maybe that's part of the process.
Yeah. So
yeah, been watching a lot of Traitors in the UK. I know the Australian one didn't go so well. The UK one, all of the contestants on it just say, I've got to trust my gut, and it never goes well. So I think the advice is do not trust your gut. Your gut is an idiot. Right.
That's how you shit yourself. Trusting your gut is how you shit yourself.
That's how you shit. Put that on a T-shirt.
I have a lower back tattoo that says that, man.
We wanted to get you on, MJ, on this day of love to talk about. We had such a good time last time talking about Rocky Vane. If people haven't heard that episode, go back and listen to it. I think when people ask about the show, it's one of the episodes that I give them first because it's such a great introduction to all kinds of stuff that people don't know about. But today we've got no snakes or no actual ones. We want to talk about another legend or maybe even the legend, I suppose, of Australian tattooing, Bev Nicholas, Bev Robinson, aka Cindy Ray. I think most people listening have certainly seen pictures of Cindy Ray because she's one of the most sort of prolifically photographed tattooed women ever. But I think a lot of people don't know much else about her. And actually, maybe what they do know is not entirely true because there was a lot of mythology and myth making about her. So we're here to talk about Cindy Ray, man.
Yeah, for sure. I've already been in trouble before by saying Bev Nicholas. It's Bev Nicholas.
Oh, is that how it's pronounced? Okay, there we go.
Yeah. I got in a bit of trouble off Patsy Farrow for saying Bev Nicholas.
No, good.
In an email one time.
I think that's it's one of those things where I'm sure it's been. I'm sure I read it somewhere and it was written wrong, and I've just remembered it incorrectly.
Dude, it's written in so many places as Nichols.
Yeah, but Nicholas. Yeah, okay, good. Well, there you go. First fact ticked off.
Tick.
I mean, I guess maybe before we go into her story, what was your first kind of encounter with her as a figure? I mean, I remember the Taschen, Hanky Panky's Taschen 1,000 Tattoos book. She's on the cover of one of the editions of it, if I remember correctly. And she, as a young, person getting into tattoos or being interested in tattoos for the first time, you can't escape her photograph, right? She's just her photographs, she's just everywhere. So yeah, what's your sort of early memories? I
feel terrible about this. It was maybe 2015 or 2016. And I traveled, I used to live in a town called Wagga Wagga. I traveled to Melbourne to go to a tattoo convention. And I was walking around and I was talking to someone going, holy shit, Cindy Ray's here tattooing her signature on someone. And I was like, no idea who that is. And at the time, I was an apprentice, ignorant, wasn't interested. I'm like, some old lady doing a signature, whoop-de-doo. And I kept walking. And it is one of my biggest regrets.
Wow.
Because shortly around that time, she just stopped altogether. She wouldn't even do that.
She's still alive.
Still alive, but she's become quite a recluse. And for various projects that I've done in the past, I've tried to interview her personally and not interested. It's, as we're going to get into, her whole life was kind of people taking advantage of her and wanting things from her and getting fucked over quite a lot. So I fully understand why she's just like not willing to give anymore. And she's given a lot, like in terms of like Australian tattooing, and like she's had kind of two careers, you know, the career as the classy lassie with the tattooed chassis, you know, the sideshow performer, the tattoo pin-up model, like the tattoo supply business, all that sort of stuff that we'll get into in a sec. But then she also went on to become a tattooer, and like, not for nothing, she was pretty fucking good at it too. So it's a really cool career to go down.
Yeah, and she's still kind of like, you know, I know she talks to Lau Hardy very regularly. Like, he's always sort of. So I saw a great photo when Danielle was over. Listeners of the show will see when we put out the video that we filmed with Danielle Boyardi. Danielle was showing me some pictures from the latter days of Lyle Tuttle's life, where it's like Danielle, Lyle, Ed Hardy, Doug Hardy, and Bev. Like, and I was like, that is a photo for the history books of the future. So she's still around, but as you said, yeah, like, you know, is sort of keeping her head down a little bit from the public eye. I mean, I guess like the other thing about her is the photos of her really, really set her in time, because those photos, the famous photos of her, were all taken in the mid 60s, right? Like mid to late 60s.
Yeah, that was really fascinating, because she had no intention of getting tattooed. She didn't grow up thinking, "Oh, I want to get tattooed." Like I heard an interview with her once, where her first tattoo that she ever saw was a lady that worked at a Chinese restaurant in Williamstown, where she grew up. You know, the first tattoo she saw was on another woman. You know, she started getting tattooed in the 60s when she was like 19. She answered an ad in a newspaper, a photographer called Harry Bartram from Heidelberg here in Melbourne, quite an eccentric, wealthy sort of photographer. He put an ad in the paper looking for a photographic model who was willing to shave their eyebrows.
Willing to shave their eyebrows. Yeah.
And the first sort of photo job wasn't even tattoo related. They literally got a makeup artist in Bev's parents' home and were just drawing eyebrows on her, different eyebrows on her, and photographing those. And that's how it started. She was just a single mum, just wanted to make money. So she was kind of doing little side hustles wherever she could. And she's like, "I'll shave my eyebrows. I give it back. I don't give a fuck."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so like she was from this town called Williamstown, right? Like, tell us, like, people don't know where that is. Like, where is it? What's it like? What's the vibe there? Certainly, what was the vibe there in the 60s?
Right. So Williamstown is sort of like a sort of harbourside part of Melbourne, where it's quite industrial. Even now, there's a lot of like sort of filtration plants and stuff out there. But at the time, in the 40s, it was used where like warships would come in for repairs, and they were building ships and all that sort of stuff out there. So the dockyards and all that sort of stuff, that was kind of the general vibe of the area. You know, it wasn't a particularly affluent part of Melbourne by any means. Now there's sort of like, you know, beachside residences that are like $3 million each and stuff like that. But it's still kind of like, there's some nice cafes there, but there's not a lot going on in Williamstown even now. And back then, you know, there wasn't the Westgate Bridge either. So like it felt quite removed from Melbourne. It was kind of like you get the train in, train out, or whatever. It wasn't as easy to access, so it felt it's a real suburb.
It's a real suburb, and not a lot of tattooing around either, right? Like I think we've talked a lot on the show, and I talk about in the book, like this period of tattoo history just everywhere. The 50s and early 60s is, you know, I've called it the winter of tattooing. Like, it is when tattooing's really on its arse everywhere. It's the reason that, you know, late 50s, mid to late 50s onwards, like people like Les Goose in the UK are fighting to keep it, you know, alive, and similar things happening in the UK. But yeah, in Australia, not like everywhere else, not a lot of tattooing happening. Certainly not a kind of like subcultural, you know, group of hip women getting tattooed, you know, at this point. Like, there's really not a lot of tattooing around in Australia at that point, right?
No. However, a lot of people think that Bev became the first sort of tattooed woman of Australia, which isn't true.
Yeah, no.
There was Alexia Hilda Alexandria, tattooed in the 30s by a guy called Bill Finesse, and
there's some amazing there's some amazing newsreel footage of her, actually, isn't there? Like of her before, of her being the Australian tattooed lady on some real cool black and white newsreel footage.
Is it the Coble photos? Is that what it is? So the sort of collection of those old sort of photos. There's a lot of Bev photos. There's like, I think 200 something photos of Bev in that Coble sort of collection. But yeah, so that Alexia was kind of Australia's first tattooed model as far back as the 30s. So way before Bev. But I don't think the fact that Bev was tattooed necessarily is what skyrocketed her to sort of global fame. It was everything that was sort of built around the brand of Cindy Ray.
Well, she was, I mean, the other thing that I see people talk about a lot, and it's sort of inescapable, is that she's genuinely conventionally attractive, right? Like, she's just a really conventionally pretty, beautiful woman, right? She's just really good looking, and that also helps. I mean, people talk about that. I mean, I was watching in prep for this, I was watching an interview with her on ABC from a while ago, and there was a guy interviewed on that, basically saying like, oh yeah, no, she not only was she good looking, but she also had really good tattoos. So she was a tattooed lady who was a good looking woman, but also had good looking tattoos, which is also a kind of extra little bump, right?
Yeah, well, so the tattoos came about. She did the eyebrow job for Harry, and then he sort of pitched the idea to her. It's like, hey, what are your thoughts on being like a tattooed woman? There's a lady in the US called Betty Broadbent, who was a tattoo model over in the States. And he's like, she's cleaning up. She's making bank over there doing sideshows and stuff like that. Like, I will pay for all of your tattoos. I choose what tattoos you get, and you can reap the rewards. And at that point, Bev, still single mum, is like, fuck it, I'll do anything for cash. No worries. So she did it. And he took Bev to South Melbourne, and there was a tattooer called Danny Robinson that was working from his home in South Melbourne at the time. She met him, and she got 4 tattoos in the first day of meeting him. 4 big ones. Well, she had 3 sort of big ones on her arms, and then she got like a cuff as well. And she said that none of them had a stencil. None of them were drawn on. They were just straight on with a machine. And I was recently talking to a tattooer here in Melbourne, Trev McStay, and he was talking about Danny Robinson back in the day. And he said that Danny Robinson, in his opinion, was the greatest flash painter in the world at that time.
Wow.
He said he was prolific in terms of like how much, like volume wise, and he goes, and just the stuff he was painting was just sort of incredible. Like, he had a reputation internationally for his flash that he was painting. So he was just going straight on with the machine, just doing these beautiful tattoos on Bev.
That's incredible. I didn't know. That's incredible.
Yeah, they just kind of kept going. It's like, I'm not sure how frequently she was going. However, like, she was only Cindy Ray, like, doing this like gig for Harry Bartram for 18 months total. And that's nuts. People still refer to her as Cindy Ray and all this sort of stuff. She was that for 18 months in the 60s, you know?
That's unbelievable. I mean, I again, on that interview, she sort of said, you know, oh, I wish they'd hurt, because if they'd hurt more, I would have stopped getting them.
I wouldn't have got as many. Yeah, absolutely. And she also kind of, now resents her tattoos. She really doesn't like the fact that she got tattooed, especially below the sort of sleeve
below
line.
the elbow. Yeah,
she went to America in the 70s, and in like 1975, she was saying that everyone was doing these like fully crushed out kind of sleeves, and she's like, maybe if I just do that and fill in all the gaps, it'll look like I'm wearing clothing. It'll look like I'm wearing long sleeves, and it won't seem as tattooey. And it's like, she's got like these blue arms, you know, like they're just like fully saturated sort of arms now. And it's crazy to me that in her mind, she's like, the way to seem less tattooed is to get more tattoos.
Do we know much about Harry Bartram? I mean, he was, we'll talk a bit more. He was clearly a bit of a sort of rough guy to be around, a bit of a sharp one. Had he had a history of this? You said he was a sort of wealthy.
Yeah, he
eccentric
came from
guy.
quite a wealthy family. He had quite a big place out in Heidelberg, where all the sort of studio photos were taken. So he had a home studio for all the photographic work. Bev also thought that he was gay as well, based on interactions where she would have to pose with a tattooer like next to her, but it's not the guy that did her tattoos.
Yeah.
It wasn't Danny Robinson. He just got some other guy to pose for the photos. And based on her observations of how he interacted with that guy, he was more interested in the guy than any sort of female that they worked with. So Bev had her suspicions that Harry was just a very eccentric, very greedy, very money hungry sort of guy. And he was using these photos and he created a business around the title Cindy Ray. And they came up with the alias Cindy Ray at Danny Robinson's when she was getting tattooed, because they're like, let's do this, let's start this business, let's sell these photos, let's sell tattoo supplies and all the catalogs, like books, like all this sort of stuff. But let's protect your identity, because you're going to get fan mail and dudes are creeps. So he had an office in a suburb called Ivanhoe, and he had a receptionist handling all the mail coming in and out. They were getting like stiletto heels sent and lingerie and creepy letters and all sorts of stuff. And it's like they got it all sent there to a PO box. So no one knew where she lived, no one knew her real name, all that sort of stuff. So he had like a whole racket going on. And Bev didn't get paid for anything except for writing letters to tattooers that were buying equipment, so that they were thinking it was coming directly from her, not from Harry. That was it. She was paid a little bit for writing letters, and he was making all this money.
Yeah, because he was selling. I mean, the books and photographs of her were like sold in in Australia, but as you said, in America, in Japan, like in translation, like the posters, like all kinds of photographs. He was, licensing them to Coble, who was then, himself making loads of profit, but she didn't see any of that money.
No. And I think she was also kind of unaware at the time as well. Like, he was sort of hiding that from her. Like, he wrote 2 books, Ghost wrote 2 books as if she'd written the books. It was Story of a Tattooed Girl.
Story of a Tattooed Girl, yeah.
And How to Do Good Tattooing. And in it, he just made up heaps of bullshit too. So it's sort of like, if she's been quizzed on, it's like, yeah, in your book, like you said this, and she's like, I didn't say that, and that never happened. So he was doing all this sort of stuff, like writing like a memoir kind of book and just making it all up.
I think, it's super interesting that as a fact, because that sort of similar thing happened with George Burchett's memoir, like in the late 50s, which was written after he died by a journalist who again wanted to tell these sort of salacious stories, and it's some of it's half true, some of it's entirely made up. It was clearly a time when, probably because tattooing was a bit déclassé and a bit out of fashion, you could sell these kind of sexy stories in a way that probably wasn't possible in the early generations. So she gets tattooed a lot by Danny. And then they marry, right? So they get married in, was it 1964, something like that? Like sometime in the mid-60s, She marries Danny Robinson, right?
And by that point, Danny was tattooing out in Williamstown. So she'd been. Was it before then? She'd been also performing on with Harry at sideshows. She'd go and sort of do in-person appearances, and said she really hated it. Yeah, she really hated it. She hated being looked at. She hated that she couldn't take a break because they couldn't sub her out for another tattooed woman.
Yeah, right.
It's not like my ship's over, you jump in. So she just had to sit there and just be gawked at and stuff. And I believe it was like some kind of show in Adelaide. A female police officer came up to her. You've probably heard this story. I think it was in the ABC interview. And a female cop tried to scrub off her tattoos, thinking that it was a scam and that they were obtaining money from these punters dishonestly.
Yeah. I think there's an interview with her in Tattoo International, I think it is, and she says it was in Tasmania, which also makes even more sense.
Right.
in Hobart. As someone who's got family in Hobart, I think that can believe that's true.
Yeah. And they're just like, no way this lady's tattooed, and grabbed her and tried to scrub them off her.
So what's the what's the relationship like with Danny professionally, as well as personally? Because if, as I understand it, I mean, the sort of short version, as I understand it, is that like she'd been presented as this, as you said, like, someone who was apparently giving out advice on how to tattoo and as a tattoo supply stuff. And she thought, it got to the stage where she thought, well, I'm just going to do it then. I'm going to be the person that you've made me into. Right? It's a bit of a weirdly Pygmalion story. I mean, it's quite dark, but in some senses, she starts to reclaim the Cindy Ray identity, if you like, for herself, right?
Well, so she started tattooing in 1966. So the Cindy Ray time of her life has come and gone by a couple of years. She's married to her tattooer, Danny Robinson, and he was tattooing out in Williamstown. So out in Williamstown, he's tattooing a lot of sailors, a lot of people in the Navy, a lot of sort of like merchant seamen. That was probably like their biggest client base. And Danny got in a pub fight and broke his hand. And he literally just said, "You have to tattoo." He goes, and just threw her in at the deep end. So that's how she started. And then in her first week of tattooing, she was making £18 a day, and I converted it to what that's worth in Australian dollars in 2025. So £18 in 1966 equates to $560 a day. She did that in her first week of tattooing. Wow. When she claimed that she was very slow at tattoo,
wow.
Yeah, so she sort of saw it as like, oh, this is a career, and because Danny was off work for however long and they lived together, they had bills, they had a shop that had to run and everything. So if she didn't tattoo, there was no money coming in. But while she was still getting tattooed by Danny, and while she was doing the Cindy Ray thing, she still had a job. She was making, I think, like cots and stuff for the army. And they didn't care that she had tattoos. They're like, she's really good at her job. And she was so good at her job, she was like making I think it was like a quilter was the name of her occupation. And so she was really good at it, and she'd get all her work done for the day. So she started making dolls, and she used to be like, her first ever job was like a dressmaker on Flinders Street, in Flinders Lane. So she's like making dolls and putting little dresses on them, and she's selling that as well. So while Harry was sort of like keeping all the money from all the Cindy Ray stuff, that's how she was actually like funding her life at that time.
And Danny's was married when they met, right? And his then wife was also tattooing. Is that right? Her name. What's her name? Raylene or Rylene?
Yeah, and her and Bev ended up becoming friends.
Really?
I'm pretty sure I've heard that from maybe Jed Hill. I'm pretty sure over time they ended up becoming friends. So basically, Bev and Danny's relationship turned out to be quite a toxic one. And it was quite tumultuous, and she won't speak on it. In interviews, when it comes up, she won't speak on it. If anyone refers to her as Bev Robinson, she's off it immediately.
Yeah.
So I can't speculate as to what that means, but it wasn't good. But so basically, once their marriage broke down, which
was like late 70s, right? They divorced in 78.
Yeah, and she went to Flinders Street to Sailor Bill's Tattoo Grotto that was owned by Kevin Coppin and Vaughan Griffiths at the time. And that was a shop where it was pretty fast and loose. Anything goes in that shop. So Bev was like, fuck it, whatever. She was doing night shift. She worked there with people like Jed Hill. And basically, I've heard a fair bit that the sort of guys that own the shop were sort of, a bit sus. Let's just say it like that.
Say it ain't so. Say it ain't so.
Upstairs, there was a pile of mattresses, which could facilitate alternative payment methods for young women who wanted to get tattooed. Bev was like, if I'm not seeing it, I just like, I'm here, do tattoos, just work, leave. She did tell a story one time. Vaughan sent a girl who he tattooed to go get hamburgers for everyone in the shop, and the girl was just gone for ages. And they're like, where is she gone? And then she eventually came back with the hamburgers, and she said to Bev, oh, I fucked the guy down at the hamburger shop in exchange for all the hamburgers. I've just kept Vaughan's money.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, real
Oh
rough.
my God, that's horrific.
So Bev worked at Sailor Bill's grotto for about 18 months, and she ended up having an argument with Vaughn because she was turning work away. Basically, someone had come in and they had tattoos that were better suited to Danny, who,
Style-wise,
yeah, style-wise. So she sent them to him, and Vaughn was like, "What are you doing turning work away?" And she's like, "We're all busy. We don't have time to do those tattoos anyway, so what does it matter?" They had a big blow up. And Bev went from there to going to St. Kilda to work with Danny again. They managed to sort of get their relationship to a point where they could work with each other. I believe that shop was called Highline Tattoo on St. Kilda Road. And I'm not too sure how long they worked together there for. And then she ended up taking over the Williamstown shop. So Danny stayed in St. Kilda.
It really speaks really highly, I think, of her character, right? That she emerges from this kind of weird exploitative relationship or business relationship or whatever with Harry Bartram, and it really quickly, like mid-60s, she's like one of two Australian members of the Tattoo Club of America, along with Johnny Dollar, John Entwistle. She becomes a correspondent with the most important tattooers in the world in California in the 70s. She's friendly with Ed Hardy and Cliff Raven and Lyle Tuttle, who we talked about. Like, for someone who sort of got dragged into this game without really knowing what she was getting herself in for, she very quickly allowed, made people understand that she was serious, and as you said, she was good. I mean, it's interesting to compare her maybe with someone like Jessie Knight, who had, again, one of the few women around that scene in the 50s. Same thing. Like, people were very inclined initially to not take her seriously, but just by sheer force of will and talent and personality and grit and rolling with the punches and just being tough as boots, like surviving in the business and thriving. And I think like it can't have been easy, right? Because I think the instinct, of course, would have been to just dismiss this silly poor woman, as like, who's a sort of, an ingenue or a victim or something. And she never let herself be that, at least after the first couple of years, right? Like it's really interesting how seriously she was taken, even though she had to kind of like, earn that reputation for herself.
Well, what's also interesting is she became friends with a tattooer from South Australia in Adelaide called Fran the Dragon Lady. And Fran was like quite extreme, shaved parts of her head and all sorts of stuff. And they were both mums, and they would sort of talk about like parenthood and everything. And Fran was frustrated about how her kids found it hard making friends at school because the parents of these other kids didn't want them going over to the Dragon Lady's house because they'd come home corrupted and all sorts of stuff. Whereas Bev didn't have that experience at all. Bev was still, going and, working the school fetes and all sorts of stuff. And the kids would have friends over and all that sort of stuff. She was just a very normal mum. She was still baking cakes for bake sales for the school and all that kind of stuff. And she wasn't really treated like a freak or anything like that within her own sort of like personal life in that kind of community.
I did read that her mum or dad called her PR, which stood for proper rat bag, because she got tattoos.
Yeah, so her parents
which is again such an Australian thing.
They were not a fan of her getting tattooed at all. They were like, what the fuck have you done? Her mum was quite an alcoholic and sort of emotionally abusive as well growing up, which Bev kind of like attributes to maybe it was acting out and maybe being a bit rebellious and doing all this stuff because she didn't have a great relationship with her mum. And Bev also never touched a drop of alcohol her whole life, completely sober. Yeah, and also hated being around people that were drunk and in that kind of environment. So it's kind of crazy to me, like the company she kept and like the friends that she'd made through tattooing, because there's a lot of really wild people that have like pretty sort of documented lives in terms of substance and alcohol abuse, and like going to these like parties and conventions and all that sort of stuff. And she hated that shit, but like she was just all about tattoos, yeah. But what's also crazy is once she'd started tattooing, her mum got pissed, which was a daily occurrence, and she tattooed a duck on her mum's arm while she was shit-faced.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I bet she wasn't happy about
that. Massive tattoo regret.
So in terms of her as a tattooer, so you mentioned the How to Do Good Tattooing book. So that was written by Bertram, and she had no input in it at all. But
no.
Like, what does it hold up as a manual? Like, as someone who's a professional tattooer, like.
I haven't read it. I haven't actually been able to find a copy. I actually found so when I was an apprentice, a guy that I worked with, Brian Brady, had one of her catalogs. And again, at the time, I flicked through it. I was like, oh yeah, that's a cool old thing. Didn't really know what I was holding in my hands, and I know that it's in his storage container somewhere. But there was a catalog that came out between the books, and it was Cindy Ray's tattoo and animal marking equipment.
Yeah,
that's the name of the catalog. And I tried to like find a copy of it, and the only thing I could find was like a Facebook page for like a rare books seller, and that catalog was $2,365.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's rare.
So
I mean,
incredibly hard to find,
because there was 2 volumes, How to Do Good Tattooing, and then in the catalog, I've got a scan of a couple of pages of an insert flyer. So basically, it says introduction by master tattooer Danny Robinson. So maybe he did write it, or maybe Bartram just stuck his name on it. Who knows?
Yeah, because how much would Harry Bartram know about the technical process of tattooing?
Right.
So it's did he just sit there while Bev got tattooed and just kind of like dictated like what he saw happening before him, and was like, oh, well, that's how you do it. Oh, he's putting some kind of white jelly on before putting a stencil. It's just like vague as fuck.
It's interesting. I mean, again, like that there was a lot of people doing that at the time. He was probably a bit of a pioneer, because that became all the rage in the 70s. People just trying to kind of peek over people's shoulders. But she did go on to like actually run a supply business, though, didn't she? Like herself, or not?
I'm not too sure.
No. So the whole Cindy Ray supply thing was always Bertram, and it was she never actually did it herself ever,
as far as I know.
Yeah.
Because maybe he also kept it going after he was done with her, all the photographic work and stuff. Maybe he just kept it going as a business. I'm not terribly sure about what ended up happening with the Cindy Ray business.
Because he did. I mean, I read in Margot Mifflin's book. Actually, she says that he tried to do the same thing with Rusty Scoos.
Oh, really?
Yeah, apparently so. And the quote that Margot has here is, she tried the same thing with Rusty Scoos, and Rusty basically told him to like sling his hook, right? She said he was a complete kind of con man. Oh, where's the exact quote?
I think what's also interesting is Harry Bartram had no tattoos himself.
Really?
So his kind of like fascination with this like tattoo sideshow sort of racket that he started in the tattoo supply business, I wonder where he thought of that from, because now in 2025 there are so many people that aren't a part of tattooing that are cashing in on tattooing. Like here in Australia we have a franchise tattoo shop called Celebrity Ink that's everywhere, and it's in shopping centers, and it's awful. And you can quote me on that. It fucking sucks. And basically it's like, there are people just buying at tattoo shops and franchising them, and they don't have tattoos. They're just like, there's good money in this, and doing that sort of stuff. So it's sort of commonplace now, people starting tattoo schools and all that kind of shit. For someone to do that in the 60s to try to cash in on back then, a very fucking niche industry, thinking there's money to be made here, is kind of bizarre to me.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, like, it seems to maybe come from, like, kind of a nostalgia, maybe, for, like, this kind of earlier era of sideshows. It's interesting. So this here's the quote, right? So this is what Morgan Mifflin says. His 2-year scam ended as suddenly as it begun, when Bartram disappeared without a word. He later resurfaced in London and attempted the same con with tattooist Rusty Scouse, who snubbed him, having heard his big bucks promises to Ray were, in Scoose's words, a load of codswallop. But Rusty would have already been tattooed by that point, probably. Yeah, what a weird moment. So, she went on to, as you said, to be a really interesting, good tattooer. Like, what was she like as an artist? Like, what's her tattooing like?
Like, I've met old guys with tattoos done by her. I tattooed a guy recently who he'd probably be in his mid-40s, and I can't remember what I tattooed on him. But he's like, yeah, I've got this one. Like, he's just showing me his other tattoos because I'm like, oh, who did this? Who did this? And he shows me on his hip a tiny little swallow. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Who did that? And he goes, oh, some lady out in Williamstown.
No.
And I'm like, your first tattoo was done by, like, Bev Nicholas. And he's like, Bev, that's it. I'm like, that is awesome. And, like, this tiny little swallow on a guy's hip that was done however long ago, maybe 80s or 90s, looks great still. Like, it looks like all old tattoos kind of do, but it was still colorful, it was small, and it's like, hips are hard to tattoo as well, like, it was great. And I saw a guy back in Wagga Wagga one time with some cool tattoos. I'm like, hey, who did these? And he showed me, and he was just like ecstatic that, like, a younger guy thought they were cool, because his whole family is like, oh, my daughters want me to get them covered because they're the blurry mess and all that sort of stuff. I'm like,
don't you dare.
Respectfully, fuck them. Like, that's awesome. I'm like, I want my tattoos to look like this, like, in the future. Like, that's the goal. And I'm like, who did this? Who did this? Who did this? And he had a leopard on his back that was bigger than hand size. And that kind of struck me, because for people listening, they might not be aware that stencils used to be done with clear acetate plastic, and was sort of etched. And typically, you look at old guys with tattoos, the tattoos themselves aren't particularly big. A lot of them, even a panther on the forearm might be palm size, kind of like placed there, and it's backwards because they didn't want to reverse an acetate and shit like that. So this leopard really struck me that it was quite large. And this is also like a time when they're tattooing with round shaders. The mag hadn't been invented yet. The shading needle that is most commonly used today, where the needles are sort of like fanned out like a paintbrush as opposed to bunched together like a pen. Back then, because they're making their own needles, Matt, you might be able to tell me, like, when mags sort of came commonplace.
I don't know, like, exactly.
90s?
I think it's probably 90s. Yeah. I think I wouldn't off the top of my head. I think there are people that claim to have invented it, and I think it does sort of come with, like, black work and people trying to do, bigger coverage stuff in the 90s. Yeah, there's probably precursors to that, but it definitely becomes a thing in the 90s.
Yeah, this leopard on the guy's shoulder blade was the size of maybe like a bread and butter sort of dinner plate. And
wow,
it was still quite like, it still had yellow in it. And, like, even modern tattoos, depending on the type of ink, whether it's like a more plastic-based pigment as opposed to like a powder pigment, yellow can fade kind of badly if it's not a good quality ink and it's not applied well. The fact that this tattoo was done a long time ago, my guess would have been 80s, and to still have a yellow in it, at that sort of size, done with a round shader, is quite impressive. So if you're packing color, it's sort of done by a whole bunch of small sort of concentric circle motions.
Yeah.
And it's slightly overlapping the part that you've just done before. And that's how they build it up. So couldn't imagine how time consuming that would have been with a round shader back then, and to get it so solid.
Well, I mean, because as you said, her own tattoos, I mean, they're so iconic because they're so clear, legible. Her front piece and her back piece are like completely iconic because people have seen those photos everywhere. Her feet, which, as you said, she doesn't like and regrets having ever had them tattooed, but her feet tattoos, again, because of the photographs of them, absolutely phenomenal, like just real legible, clear trad stuff. Done. Well, all of her tattoos done by Danny Robinson, yeah. Well, in that era, because
in the 60s for sure.
Because some of the photos are, as you said, with this guy posing, they call him Johnny Lee, but that's just the fake name of the model, the handsome young model doing the tattoo. Yeah. So her tattoos are so incredibly legible, right?
Her iconic chest piece where it's like a butterfly lady. Yeah. She ended up getting covered because people were accusing her of being a lesbian because she's got Sheila's tattooed all over her, and she just sort of got in her own head about it, and was like, so eventually at some point, I'm not sure when, she got that covered up. She said all the stuff on her back, she's like, I can't see it, so I don't give a fuck. But yeah, so it like her relationship with her own tattoos is quite interesting. That she had incredible tattoos. Every tattoo that was done in her Cindy Ray career in that 18 months where she got quite heavily tattooed in a small period of time, that was all Danny Robinson, and all those tattoos are amazing.
I mean, this is one of the stories that's in one of the interviews with her from the period, which actually has a picture of the drawing for that front piece. So again, this is the mythology, right? So it says a pretty succinct reason for undergoing thousands of jabs from the tattooer's needle for males. But this is a girl we're talking about who's become so fascinated by the dermal arch, she's literally in it up to the neck. Even at the age when other girls were interested in movies or rock singers, Cindy Ray had already had her eye on the tattoo world. Right, so none of that actual true story about what happened. It's like, no, this is a girl that really wanted to be a tattooed person, and luckily met up with a young man who could perform the necessary delicate operation. She wanted a large bunch of roses transferred in ink to her back, but the proffered designs didn't seem right. Roses anyhow can be passé. So, being a student at an art school, is that true? Did she go to art school?
No. So none of that is true.
None of that is true. Yeah.
The real story behind the roses on the back is Harry Bartram went and got the design drawn somewhere else, and then took it in to the appointment and got it tattooed.
Yeah.
So she had no say in the tattoos that she got. Harry was literally being like, "You're getting this here."
So this is where they told that story. She called upon a fellow artist to draw a central nude figure against a black background surrounded by butterflies with an alternative pose using doves. The designs were subject to long conferences, and the back result was an elaborate creation of a fan dancer in a top hat with 17 butterflies. The design stretches from the top of her shoulders to the end of her spine, and Miss Ray believes it to be the biggest ever put on a girl's back. White girl might be more accurate. I've seen the backs of Japanese women without a square inch of untattooed skin. At the same time, because it's not practicable to keep jabbing at the same area, she started her personal collection in other places. Both her arms were fully tattooed from shoulder to wrist, with 2 large designs on each leg to the ankles. Miss Ray, now on the way to becoming the most tattooed Australian in history, became so immersed in the progress she decided to take up the art herself and merchandise the material for others. She's now a professional operating from a small room in her parents' house with paraphernalia, pigments, literature, and technical information. And if that's not a strange occupation for a girl, then what is? Apart from the business side, it's also opened up a world for her with lists of thousands of tattoo fans. She corresponds with and make friends personalities in every part of the globe. Her name, pictures, and desires for a career a teenage tattooist was real news in the world of aficionados and passed from fan to fan, and mail is constantly arriving. So the story is that, yeah, she desperately wanted it doing, and like every design, long as you said, like no choice in the design, but the way the story's told is, oh yeah, it was a big artistic collaboration that she is kind of invested. It's so grotesque, actually. Like
part of that story that is true is that she did go home and was working privately from her parents' home in Williamstown at one point, which was the period where she tattooed her drunk mum.
Yeah, it's absolutely mad. What kind of reputation did she have amongst other tattooers in Melbourne and around Australia when she was working? I know now she's a legend, but and you said she sort of held her own when she was working with Vaughan and stuff. Like, did she get a lot of flack for being a girl in a boys' game?
I don't think so. I mean, I've seen multiple photos of her hanging out with these other tattooers, so it's sort of like she's there socially in these scenarios where I think if they disliked her, she wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be hanging out. It wasn't like they worked together and they're across the shop and they didn't like each other and they just happen to be in an environment. She's going to like social things with them and hanging out. And so there's so many photos of that. I know that Dickie Reynolds, who tattooed on Flinders Street and tattooed in Richmond and stuff as well, refused to tattoo women and refused to have women in his shop. So it would be interesting to know what their relationship was like, because I haven't seen a photo of Bev with Dickie before. But there's photos of Bev with John Entwistle, Johnny Dollar, who, for my money, I would have said that he was the most tattooed Australian ever. He was so heavily tattooed at a fairly young age. There's old photos of him wearing like a cheetah G-string showing off his tattoos. But like, he doesn't have big tattoos. They're all quite small, and his entire body was crushed out. And I've heard stories from other old guys where they're like, yeah, we would have like get-togethers and tattoo conventions and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, Johnny's covered. Johnny's the most tattooed guy here. So in those circles, for him to be like considered, oh, that guy's crushed out, I'd say maybe he was the most tattooed Australian ever at that point.
It's not as good a story though. Posing pouch notwithstanding. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think the parallels with Jessie Knight are really interesting, because Jessie actually herself refused, certainly at one point in his career, to tattoo women. She had signs in her shop saying, I don't tattoo women. She retired in 1970. But yeah, as you said, like those guys wouldn't have people around that they didn't respect, right? And it's really clear that Bev earned everybody's respect, and rightly so. I want to just finish off. There are a couple of excerpts that I found from the How to Do Good Tattooing, and I want to. We'll see. Awesome. We'll see if. Well, this is going to be some lessons for you, MJ. Listen up. Take notes, right?
Yeah, so, I might learn how to do good tattooing.
Exactly. Well, maybe this is not good about you. You're saying about how your drawing was no good today, and trust the process, right? Danny Robinson or Harry Bartram or Bev herself, whoever wrote this, if you cannot do a first-class finished design on paper first, you have no hope of doing good tattooing. Sorry, dude.
That one stung a bit.
Yeah. Shaky and uneven lines are the result of insufficient skill. To line correctly must be learned. There's no point in doing a lot of work incorrectly. Get your line work right.
True. I feel like these are also quite broad, general statements. I feel like you don't have to be an expert to be able to be like, you have to be. What they've essentially just said is, your tattoo has to be good or it's not.
Yeah. In some instances, doesn't say what those instances are, it is desirable to get someone to assist you.
You just tap out and get someone else to
tap in.
Well, that's what Danny did with Bev. He tapped out. He broke his hand, he tapped out, and Bev had to come in and help him.
Well, Samuel Stewart said about Milton's Ice, right? Like, the man he called some con man from Rockford, Illinois. He was like, you can't. He said you can't. He said learning to tattoo from a book is like learning to swim in your living room, right?
Yeah.
And he said, and Sammy said that he thinks he's the only person that ever actually read like Milton's Ice's How to Tattoo book, because he said no one can have read this because it just doesn't work. And maybe that's also the case for this.
Interesting.
The book also finishes the last chapter in the book. Anyone who's interested in doing a little tattooing, whether it be just a little personal work or a potential career or hobby, should be able to do it well if he or she is able to apply the guidance I've given in the book. Handwriting is a good guide. If you can write neatly, there's no reason why you should not tattoo well. Although Danny Robinson is a strange exception to this rule. His handwriting is shocking, but his tattooing is excellent.
just calls him out.
Well, he might have written it about himself. That's the thing, right? If we don't know who actually wrote those words down, maybe that's him. Maybe, as you said, maybe that's Harry like looking over and going, Danny's been telling me that to be a good tattoo, you got to have good handwriting, but his handwriting's shitty and it's a weird dig. I don't know. All these layers of textual, of who actually wrote it. Amazing. So she's must be in her 80s now, right?
Yeah. Born in 1942. So
yeah. Does she still ever turn up at conventions or events? And you said not really.
I think that one that I saw her at was the last time she did it.
Amazing. Yeah.
In Australia. I don't think she's traveled internationally since then. But actually, I think she went to the States to be inducted into like the Tattoo Hall of Fame or something like that. So
she went. Yeah, she went to Lyle Tuttle's like 70th event thing. Which is where Danny and Ed and Lyle and Doug had dinner. She has been to England. I don't know when the last time she was in the UK was, because as I said, Lyle's definitely had her over and speaks to her regularly. But I'm glad, she's still going strong. Like, what an absolute hero, I think. And I think her story is, is really interesting, just as a indication of like just how fucking shitty the world was in the 60s and 70s, and how badly women were treated. And, and I think for her to emerge from that like period of time and that process to be the kind of like, independent, strong, forthright, funny, like woman that she became and continues to be, I think like it's a real testament, right, to her and her strength of character, I think.
For sure. And I think also the 18 months that she was Cindy Ray wasn't a good time for her. And for anyone that kind of like knows her in some capacity, knows, Cindy Ray, like, can you sign this Cindy Ray stuff? And she's always been quite gracious about that as well. Like she is aware of what the name Cindy Ray means to other people, and she lets them have that. She doesn't ruin that illusion for them and be like, "Fuck that! You call me like that," like all that sort of stuff. So I think that's kind of cool too. She could easily just be like, "I'm not talking about that shit. Like that was a bad time in my life."
Yeah.
But she
and I
knows
know, and again, like I think other,
cool.
A woman, another interesting woman called Winnie Ayres, who was like briefly was Jesse Knight's apprentice, completely withdrew from tattooing, and doesn't want to talk about it to anybody. Like Dot Shaw, who was a really interesting female tattooer in the 60s up in Blackpool, like was horribly abused by the tattooer that she worked for, and didn't speak, when she left the business, like didn't talk about tattooing ever, to the point where we did an event with her online. She died sadly a few years ago, but we did an online event with her during COVID, and in the chat there was like loads of her friends who were like, I never knew this about you, like Dot. So clearly, like, the way that women have been treated by men in the tattoo industry has not been a laudatory tale. And I think like no one would, as you said, no one would have blamed her if she'd have just wanted to withdraw from that world, but to kind of find a way to own it and to reclaim it in some way, I think is really amazing. And I think also, it's probably also a bit of a laudatory or cautionary tale, I think, right? Because there's lots of tongue wagging and tutting at, like, again, still young women who are becoming tattoo models and getting a lot of coverage at their own behest or at the behest of those around them, or and I think it's easy to kind of dismiss that. But when you think about the history of it and where it comes from, and the complex power dynamics and gender dynamics and financial dynamics and stuff in play, I think like it becomes really interesting to think about even the things that are quite easily dismissed, Instagram models and stuff.
I think it's also like a common misconception that women getting tattooed is a recent phenomenon.
Oh yeah.
Which could not be further from the truth. Going back centuries, women getting tattooed. The Berber people of Morocco, it's predominantly women that got tattooed.
Yeah.
The Ainu women of Japan, like, it's women have been getting tattooed almost like just as consistently as men throughout history. So like this common misconception that's like, oh, now girls are getting tattooed.
Well, I love, I love a good not just for sailors myth, collect them. This is probably a good place to finish, because here is one from the Miss Cindy Ray, A Story of a Tattooed Girl book. The casual observer might think that really tattooing is reserved for the sailor, the soldier, the airman, and the young buck about town. But, outside this field, tattooing is rarely found. Oh, how wrong this impression can be. Right? I found that tattooing is very much alive today in nearly every walk of life, and some very surprising people, both male and female, are heavily and very secretly tattooed. So there
heavily
we go.
And very secretly. I like
very
that.
secretly.
That's cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, MJ. Could chat to you forever. We'll definitely have you back on again to talk more Australian. I haven't even done my Australian accent yet today.
I know. I was waiting for it the whole time.
I'm just sort of warming up to it, mate.
Ready for it, waiting.
It's just there under the surface. It's like right kind of buried.
It just kind of sounds like you've been left in a hot car for a bit.
Yeah.
Melting a bit.
Well, my Australian accent is filtered through. Really, the only time I really heard it growing up was when my dad was either pissed or talking to his sister on the phone.
All right, so, get extra Australian on the phone.
Yeah. So my encounters with the Australian diphthongs when I was like, learning to speak were particularly kind of slurred. I think
the last time we did this, you were doing an Australian Werner Herzog.
Oh yeah. Don't let's not start that again. Tom will have to edit it. Where can listeners see more about what you're up to? Where can they follow you? Come get tattooed by you? What's the story?
So I work at a shop called Corpus in Melbourne, Australia.
Great name.
It's such a cool name, and it's Steve Cross who started the shop. I think Corpus is 17 this year. Next year we can take Corpus to a strip club, and Corpus can drink next year. But it's Corpus with a C is the Latin word for body, so he changed it to a K for search engine optimization purposes. Amazing. Social media is just MJ Forrest with 2 R's and an underscore at the end.
Nice. MJ Forrest underscore, because what was there already an MJ Forrest no underscore?
I think so. Yeah.
Search engine optimization, there's been a real proliferation of businesses called like whatever it is near me, because that's what people type into Google. So tattoo shop near me, MJ Forrest near me, for people who are trying to find you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Right, I need to do it.
Thank you so much. I know it's you've had a long day. I'm just sort of getting started over here in the UK. Thanks to everyone for listening. Normal service will be resumed next week when Tom will be back. We'll have more guests on the show. You know where to find us, but for the time being, thank you very much and goodbye.